The scent of roasted turkey, cinnamon candles, and fresh pine filled the house. Laughter spilled from the dining room, echoing off the polished floors. Plates clinked, glasses toasted, and Margot sat at the head of the table, quietly watching her family bustle around her. She wore her best red sweater, the one her late husband always said made her look as bright as Christmas itself. Her heart swelled with pride. This was what she lived for. Family gathered under one roof, safe, fed, and full of life. Sierra, her granddaughter, was perched on her phone at the far end of the table, half listening to the conversation around her. Her boyfriend, a boy with slicked-back hair and a smug grin, nudged her playfully. Margot leaned forward, ready to ask Sierra about her upcoming college graduation. She wanted to tell her how proud she was, how she had been saving something special for this very moment. Before she could speak, she heard it, clear as a bell. "Grandma's just useless now," Sierra said with a casual shrug, loud enough for the whole table to hear. A ripple of uneasy laughter followed. Her daughter, Carla, gave a half-hearted, "Sierra!" but didn't press it. Her son, Henry, looked down at his plate. The boyfriend chuckled into his wineglass. No one met Margot's eyes. She sat frozen, her fork hovering over her plate, the turkey growing cold. Her breath caught, sharp and small in her chest. The room buzzed around her, but it felt like she had been dropped behind glass, separate and unseen. She didn't cry, she didn't flinch. She simply smiled, a small, brittle thing, and set her fork down neatly next to her untouched dinner. Outside the window, snow had started to fall. Tiny flakes swirled against the black sky like forgotten wishes. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. There was a time when Margot Bennett's home was the heart of every celebration. After her husband, Walter, passed away 12 years earlier, she had made a silent vow. She would keep the family strong, no matter what it took. Birthdays, Easter brunches, Thanksgiving dinners, she hosted them all, pouring herself into every detail. She ironed the good linen, polished the family silver, and baked pies from scratch, just like her grandmother had taught her. Her children, Carla and Henry, would always show up, often a little late, but always with smiles and hugs. Sierra, her first grandchild, had been Margot's brightest light. She was there for Sierra's first steps, her ballet recitals, her middle school graduations. When Sierra got her driver's license, it was Margot who surprised her with her old Honda. Polished and refurbished, a labor of love. Margot's small 2-story house overflowed with memories. In the spring, tulips she planted decades ago bloomed along the walkway. In winter, she strung lights across the porch, even when the ladder shook under her aging legs. Every corner of that house was touched by family. Crayon drawings from Sierra hung behind kitchen cabinet doors. Carla's childhood books still sat on the living room shelves. Henry's old fishing gear gathered dust in the garage. There were so many sacrifices Margot had made without a second thought. When Walter's pension barely covered the mortgage, she took up tutoring neighborhood kids in the evenings. When Henry needed help covering his first college semester, she quietly took out a second mortgage on the house. When Carla went through her messy divorce, Margot opened her doors without hesitation, even when it meant squeezing 2 extra people into her modest home. To Margot, love was service. Love was patience, loyalty, and doing things even when they weren't convenient. She didn't expect much in return, just the feeling of being needed, of being part of something larger than herself. Every year at Christmas, she bought gifts months in advance, wrapping them with delicate bows and handwritten tags. She made sure every stocking was stuffed, every seat at the table perfectly set. The family traditions were small but sacred. Opening one present on Christmas Eve, taking a family photo in matching pajamas, sitting around the fire sharing one thing they were grateful for that year. She thought she was teaching them something important, that family wasn't about grand gestures, but about showing up, year after year, no matter what. As the years passed, though, the little cracks started to show. Margot brushed them aside. When Sierra missed Thanksgiving to spend it with friends in the city, Margot shrugged and said, She's young. She should live her life. When Carla forgot Margot's birthday 2 years in a row, Margot laughed it off, telling herself she probably had too much on her plate. When Henry canceled their annual summer barbecue because he had work commitments, Margot sent him a care package instead, telling him she understood. She always understood, always forgave, always assumed the bonds of family were thicker than time, distance, or neglect. She took comfort in the little moments that still made her heart soar. A call from Henry on a random Tuesday, a birthday card from Carla, a half-hearted hug from Sierra when she stopped by on her way somewhere else. They were busy. Life was busy. That's what she told herself. In quiet moments when the house was too silent and the clock ticked too loudly, doubt crept in. She wondered if she was being left behind, but then the holidays would roll around again, and she would pour herself into the preparations, desperate to recreate the warmth she had always known. It wasn't foolishness, it was hope. And that hope kept her setting the table for people who no longer saw her the way they once had. Until Christmas night, when Sierra's careless words shattered the illusion Margot had spent years clinging to. It had been early December, just a few weeks before Christmas, when the first real sign flickered to life. Small, almost dismissible, but undeniable once seen. Margot was sitting at the old oak dining table she and Walter had bought decades ago, a cup of steaming chamomile tea by her elbow, a notebook opened in front of her. She had spent the afternoon researching scholarship options and graduate application tips. Sierra, after all, was planning to apply to some of the top law schools in the country, and Margot wanted to help however she could. When Sierra walked in, earbuds dangling from her ears, a distracted smile tugging at her lips, Margot's heart lifted. She patted the chair next to her. "I thought maybe we could go over some essay ideas together, sweetheart," Margot offered warmly, sliding the notebook toward her. "I found some tips on how to make your applications really stand out." Sierra paused, pulling one earbud out. She glanced at the table, then at Margot, her smile tightening. "That's sweet, Grandma, but you wouldn't really get what they're looking for these days," Sierra said lightly, almost laughing. "It's all different now. It's not like when you were young." The words stung more than they should have. Margot blinked, her hands still resting on the pages she had so carefully prepared. "Oh," she said, forcing a little chuckle. "Well, I suppose some things have changed, but hard work and sincerity, they never go out of style." Sierra was already checking her phone again, barely listening. "Yeah, anyway, thanks though. I've got it covered. My advisor knows what to do." Without waiting for a reply, Sierra breezed past her, disappearing upstairs with the energy of someone brushing aside something obsolete. Margot sat there for a moment longer, the notebook still open, her tea gone cold. She tried to shake it off. After all, Sierra was young. Young people always thought they knew better. Still, the dismissal lingered. It wasn't just the words. It was the easy way Sierra had said them, as if Margot's life experience, her years of hard-earned wisdom, her sacrifices, counted for nothing in this new, fast-moving world. Later that night, when Margot told Carla about it over the phone, Carla laughed it off. "You know how she is, Mom," Carla said breezily. "She's just stressed about finals. Don't take it personally." Margot nodded along, agreeing because that's what she had always done. She didn't want to be the kind of mother or grandmother who clung too tightly, who made everything about herself. She told herself she was being sensitive. She told herself it wasn't a big deal. And yet, deep down, something shifted that night. It wasn't anger that took root. It was a quiet, aching awareness. A tiny, persistent voice whispered, "You are becoming invisible to them." But Margot still clung to the traditions, the rituals, the plans she had already set in motion for Christmas. She wrapped Sierra's gifts with extra care. She ironed the good tablecloth. She even baked Sierra's favorite lemon bars, hoping the familiar scent would pull her granddaughter back to the simple, grounding love that Margot had always given freely. She wanted to believe that one careless comment didn't mean anything bigger, that love, history, and blood were enough to withstand the shifts of time. Margot buried the hurt beneath busy hands and hopeful smiles, because surely Surely when they all gathered around her Christmas table, they would remember. Surely they would see her. Surely they would know she mattered. The first crack had appeared. But Margot, ever the optimist, painted over it, not realizing how deep the fracture already ran. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, the shift became harder for Margot to ignore. Small things at first, things she told herself not to notice. When she called Sierra to ask if she needed anything for Christmas dinner, Sierra barely answered between yawns. "I don't care, Grandma. Just whatever. It's not that serious." When Margot suggested a few family games they used to play, Carla sighed over the phone. "Mom, we're not kids anymore. Don't stress yourself out, we'll just hang out." Hang out. Like visiting her was a casual drop-in, not a tradition anchored in love and time. At the grocery store, Margot found herself hesitating in the baking aisle, wondering if she should even bother with the lemon bars Sierra used to beg for. She baked them anyway, telling herself that when Sierra tasted them, she would remember. She would smile. She would come back. But when Margot mentioned the treats during a family group chat, no one replied. Not even a thumbs up. The family photo Margot had framed on her mantel, a glossy shot from 5 Christmases ago, with all of them smiling arm in arm, started to feel like a relic from a life that no longer existed. There were other small cruelties, too. Carla reassigning the Christmas Eve dinner time without asking her, just a breezy group text. "Hope 5 p.m. is good for everyone." Henry mentioning that they might swing by if traffic wasn't bad, not even confirming their plans. Sierra liking posts on social media about choosing your real family, but ignoring Margot's messages asking when she could help decorate the tree. Margot wasn't naive. She understood that life moved fast, that young people grew busy and distracted. But this felt different. It wasn't just busyness, it was indifference. She found herself shrinking inside her own home, leaving the dining table set, even though nobody stopped by. Baking entire pies and delivering slices to neighbors because there was no one left who wanted them. Decorating the tree mostly alone, humming to herself to fill the silence. One evening, she sat in the living room with the lights off, except for the soft glow of the Christmas tree. The ornaments, each one carrying a story, glinted in the low light. Walter's favorite fishing ornament. Sierra's baby's first Christmas ornament. The porcelain angel her children had pooled their allowance to buy her decades ago. Each glittering memory reminded her of a time when she was needed, wanted, loved out loud. Now she felt like a piece of old furniture everyone was too polite to move out of the way. There was no big fight, no cruel words hurled in anger, just the slow, persistent erosion of attention, of affection, of belonging. Margot learned to fill the spaces where love used to live. She read longer. She gardened, even though it was winter, tending to the indoor plants Walter had loved. She started writing letters she never sent. Memories she feared would die if she didn't record them. In the quiet of her home, the memories roared louder than ever. Not of arguments or betrayals, but of slow fading, of family traditions that no one seemed to value but her, of hugs that had grown mechanical, of conversations that felt obligatory, timed, hollow. She was becoming invisible, and it was happening right in front of her, still. Margot clung to Christmas Day with a desperation she didn't want to admit. She told herself it would be different once they were all under her roof, once the smells and songs of the season wrapped them up again like they used to. She told herself that when they saw her effort, when they sat around her table, when they opened her carefully chosen gifts, they would remember. Surely they would remember, because the only thing worse than being forgotten was realizing you had already been. Christmas Day arrived, but something in the air felt heavier than before. Margot woke early, slipping out of bed with the same excitement that had fueled her every Christmas morning for decades. She brewed a fresh pot of coffee, warmed the cinnamon rolls she had stayed up late baking, and carefully laid out the serving dishes shaped like holly leaves and snowflakes. By noon, the house was glowing. Wreaths on the doors, stockings by the fireplace, candles flickering on every windowsill. The table was set perfectly. down to the antique china she only used once a year. Each name card was handwritten, each gift selected with aching attention to detail. Margot had even bought Sierra something special, a delicate silver bracelet engraved with a quote they had shared since Sierra was little. "Brave girl, strong heart." She wrapped it carefully, tying it with a red velvet ribbon. It wasn't flashy or expensive like the things Sierra usually flaunted on social media, but it was deeply personal, meaningful. At 3 p.m., the doorbell finally rang. Carla rushed in first, juggling shopping bags filled with store-bought desserts she barely acknowledged. Henry followed behind, distracted by his phone. Sierra came in last, dressed casually, her eyes glued to her screen as she texted. Margot greeted each of them warmly, wrapping them in hugs that were returned stiffly or distractedly. She pushed down the small sting each time and led them into the living room. "Everything looks beautiful, Mom," Carla said absent-mindedly, not really looking around. Dinner was chaotic. Conversations overlapping, inside jokes Margot wasn't part of, comments about new TV shows she had never heard of. She tried to keep up, tried to add to the conversation, but every time she spoke, the dialogue shifted away from her within seconds, as if her words dissolved before they even landed. Still, she smiled, serving plates, refilling glasses, laughing politely even when the jokes left her out. After dessert, Margot reached under the tree for Sierra's gift, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. "Sierra," she called gently, holding out the small velvet box. "I found something for you. I thought you might like it." Sierra, who had been scrolling through Instagram, barely looked up. She took the box with one hand, flicked open the lid, and stared at the bracelet inside. A moment stretched, brittle and silent. Then Sierra snorted. "A bracelet? Seriously, Grandma?" she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. She tilted the box toward her boyfriend, who peered in with a smirk. "I mean, it's quaint," Sierra added, laughing. "Guess you can't expect much. It's not like she knows what's cool anymore." The room erupted in an awkward wave of chuckles. Carla tried to shush her daughter lightly, but the damage was already done. Even Henry looked away, pretending to be fascinated by the folds in his napkin. Margot sat still, the smile still fixed on her face like porcelain. Her hands, resting in her lap, tightened just slightly. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, but she wouldn't let them see it. She wouldn't give them that. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers brushing against the fabric of her best sweater, the one Walter loved, the one she wore today, hoping he would have been proud of her. The words replayed in her head, each syllable carving a little deeper. "Seriously, Grandma? Quaint. Useless." Margot suddenly felt absurd in her own home, like a relic placed on a shelf for nostalgia's sake, but utterly irrelevant to the people around her. She looked around the room, at the children she had sacrificed so much for, the granddaughter she had cherished more than her own comfort, and realized, with stunning clarity, that they didn't see her anymore. They didn't remember the nights she stayed up sewing costumes. They didn't remember the scholarships she helped them chase, the houses she helped keep afloat, the heartbreaks she nursed quietly from the kitchen while stirring soup. They remembered only convenience, only what she could no longer offer. Margot stood up slowly, gathering a few plates as an excuse to move. No one stopped her. No one followed. In the kitchen, she set the dishes in the sink with trembling hands. She stared out the window at the snow falling under the porch light, soft, relentless, pure. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, something quieter. A decision beginning to take root, and though they didn't know it yet, that was the moment Margot began to leave them behind. Margot finished stacking the plates, wiping her hands slowly on a dish towel as voices buzzed faintly from the dining room. She didn't rush back. She didn't need to. They weren't waiting for her. From the corner of her eye, she saw Sierra hand her velvet box to her boyfriend, laughing like it was a joke they both understood, but she wasn't meant to hear. Margot set the towel down and walked upstairs without a word, her steps quiet, deliberate. She entered her bedroom and closed the door gently behind her. For a moment, she simply stood there, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was someone she barely recognized. A woman still dressed for a family who didn't see her, still hosting a party for people who had long stopped valuing her invitations, still giving pieces of herself to people who considered her an obligation, not a blessing. In that silence, the decision formed, clean, sharp, irreversible. Margot pulled a small suitcase from the closet and placed it on the bed. It was instinctive, like muscle memory. She wasn't running away. She wasn't fleeing in shame. She was simply choosing herself, maybe for the first time in decades. She packed slowly, methodically, a few warm sweaters, comfortable shoes, a worn leather journal Walter had given her, the essentials, and nothing more. She left the good jewelry where it was, the family heirlooms in the drawers untouched. Let them have the things they cared so much about. Let them divide it all someday, fighting over trinkets they never truly valued. She wrote a short note on a plain piece of stationery and left it on the bedside table. "Thank you for dinner. Merry Christmas. Love, Mom." No guilt, no anger, no plea for understanding. By the time she returned downstairs, the family was sprawled across the living room, eyes on their phones, televisions, or each other, but not on her. She slipped her coat on, grabbed her suitcase, and walked toward the front door. No one noticed. She paused for just a second, her hand on the doorknob, taking one last look at the home she had poured her soul into for decades. The memories hung heavier than the decorations. She closed her eyes and breathed in deep, savoring the scent of cinnamon, pine, and something else. Freedom. Then she stepped outside. The cold night air wrapped around her like a baptism. The snow was thicker now, blanketing the world in silence. Her suitcase wheels left thin tracks on the driveway as she walked toward the sidewalk, her steps steady. She didn't know where she was going yet, but for the first time in years, the question thrilled her rather than terrified her. Behind her, the house glowed with warm yellow light. But it might as well have been a stranger's house for all the warmth it had offered her tonight. Margot kept walking, not hurried, not afraid, not broken. The woman who had hosted Christmas after Christmas, who had forgiven every slight, who had waited for scraps of attention, that woman stayed behind. The one walking into the night was someone new, someone whole. Margot didn't need a confrontation. She didn't need a dramatic farewell. She didn't need their apologies or realizations. They could keep their assumptions. They could keep their stories. She had given them everything she could, and it hadn't been enough to make them see her. Now she would see herself, and that would be enough. At the corner of the street, Margot turned back for just a moment. The house stood quiet, unaware that it had lost something irreplaceable. Margot smiled softly, tucked her scarf tighter around her neck, and disappeared into the snow. Margot checked into a small inn just outside town, the kind of place with faded carpets and floral curtains, the kind that smelled faintly of old wood and dust. She signed the guest book with steady hands, ignoring the curious glance from the night clerk. To him, she was just another traveler needing a warm place to land. Room 204, second floor, end of the hall. She rolled her small suitcase across the thin carpet, the hallway eerily quiet, except for the hum of a vending machine somewhere nearby. When she opened the door, the room greeted her with plainness. A queen-sized bed, a small desk, a television bolted to the wall. No wreaths, no lights, no stockings, just neutral walls and stale air. Margot stood in the center of the room, her hands hanging by her sides. She didn't cry. There were no sobs, no angry outbursts, just a deep, low ache that settled in her bones like a winter chill that no fire could fix. She sat down on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping beneath her weight. For a long while, she just stared at the wall across from her, not thinking, not planning, just existing. This was rock bottom. Not because she had no home. She could go back any time if she wanted. Not because she had no money. She had enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life. It was because, for the first time, Margot realized that her entire identity had been built around being useful to people who no longer saw her worth. Without them, without Christmas dinners to cook, without emergencies to fix, without presents to wrap, Who was she? A silent nobody in a rented room on Christmas night. At some point, she pulled the heavy quilt over herself without changing out of her clothes. The television droned quietly, an old black and white movie about hope and miracles. But she barely heard it. The world outside the window was blanketed in snow, the parking lot empty except for her small car. The minutes crawled into hours. She thought about the past, about how fiercely she had loved Walter, how hard they had fought for their little family. She thought about Sierra's tiny hands clutching hers when she learned to walk, about Carla crying on her shoulder after her divorce, about Henry dropping by for Sunday dinners when he was lonely and broke. She thought about how easily they had drifted away once they didn't need her to fix things anymore. The weight of loneliness was suffocating, pressing into every inch of the small, unfamiliar room. She closed her eyes tightly, willing herself not to fall apart. At some point, sleep came. Fitful, restless. She dreamed of Christmases past, of laughter that was warm and unforced, of Walter pulling her into a dance around the living room while the kids laughed. She woke with a start just before dawn, the first pale light creeping through the gap in the curtains. Margot sat up slowly, her body stiff, her heart hollow. The silence was different now, heavier. It wasn't the peaceful solitude she had imagined freedom would feel like. It was emptiness, raw, cutting, undeniable. She stood up and crossed to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The world outside was white and still. No footsteps marred the fresh snow, no cars moved along the road. The inn was tucked far enough away from town that even the Christmas lights seemed distant, muted. Margot rested her forehead against the cold window pane. The girl who had once believed that love alone could hold a family together was gone. The woman staring out at the frozen landscape was someone else now, someone who had nothing left to lose. It wasn't just the loss of family that weighed on her. It was the loss of who she had been for them, the realization that they had moved on without her, the bitter understanding that love, when taken for granted long enough, could fade quietly into obligation and resentment. Margot drew a slow breath, her breath fogging up the glass. She traced a small heart on the window with the tip of her finger, watching it disappear almost immediately. Gone like so many of the things she had clung to for so long. For the first time in her life, Margot faced a future that was hers alone to build. No roadmap, no role to fill, no one to answer to, just her. And though the idea terrified her, somewhere deep inside the rubble of who she used to be, a tiny ember stirred. She wasn't ready yet, but soon she would be. Morning broke slow and gray. Margot dressed in silence, pulling on the same clothes she had worn the day before. She braided her silver-streaked hair neatly down her back, smoothing stray wisps with careful fingers. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, leaving a still, white world stretching endlessly in every direction. She didn't know what to do next. There was no plan, no destination, only the aching awareness that her old life had quietly closed its door behind her. At the checkout counter, the young clerk barely looked up as Margot slid her key across the desk. He mumbled a polite, "Merry Christmas," without meeting her eyes. Margot thanked him anyway, pulling her coat tighter against the cold as she stepped into the morning. Instead of driving home, she turned in the opposite direction, almost without thinking, toward the small cemetery on the edge of town. It wasn't until she pulled into the gravel parking lot, her tires crunching against the frozen ground, that she realized where her heart had been leading her. Walter's grave. She hadn't been there since autumn, when the leaves had turned fiery and the air still smelled of harvest and home. She had promised herself she would visit on Christmas Eve, but life, or what she had convinced herself was life, had gotten in the way. Now it was time. Margot walked carefully across the frozen earth, her boots leaving shallow prints. The cemetery was deserted, rows of stones dusted with snow like forgotten monuments. She found Walter's grave near the old oak tree, the headstone simple and dignified, just the way he would have wanted. She brushed the snow away with her gloved hand, tracing his name with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry, Walt." she whispered, her voice catching on the brittle winter air. "I should have come yesterday. I should have seen things sooner." The wind stirred around her, lifting the hem of her coat, but Margot stayed kneeling, grounding herself in the only piece of her life that still felt solid. After a long while, she sat back on her heels and noticed something tucked behind the stone. Something she hadn't seen before. A battered leather binder. At first, she thought someone else must have left it by mistake, but when she picked it up, she saw her name embossed faintly on the front cover. Margot Bennett. Frowning, she opened it carefully. The pages inside were yellowed but neatly organized. Rows of documents, notes, letters. Her breath caught as she flipped through them. Walter's handwriting was everywhere. Careful, looping, unmistakable. Deeds to properties she hadn't known he purchased years ago. Investment accounts she had forgotten about. Life insurance policies naming her as the sole beneficiary. Trust funds. Untouched, protected. Walter had spent years building something for her, quietly, steadily, never saying a word because that was the kind of man he had been. He knew she would need it one day. He had trusted her to know when it was time to claim it. Tears welled in Margot's eyes, not from sadness, but from the fierce swell of being seen, even after all this time, of being loved without conditions. She turned to the back of the binder where a handwritten letter was tucked into a plastic sleeve. She pulled it out carefully. "You gave your whole heart to this family. If there ever comes a time when you need to start over, on your terms, I want you to have everything you need. Love builds. You built this. Now it's yours. Always yours. W." Margot pressed the letter against her chest, feeling the words like a heartbeat. Walter had known. He had seen the way love could turn to indifference, how sacrifice could be taken for granted. He had trusted her not to waste her life waiting for people to appreciate what they no longer valued. In that moment, kneeling in the snow with the binder clutched against her heart, Margot felt something inside her shift again. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. She stood slowly, her legs stiff from the cold, but her spirit steadier than it had been in months. Margot tucked the binder carefully under her arm, brushing a final kiss against Walter's name on the stone. "Thank you," she whispered. She turned back toward her car, leaving footprints behind her, but carrying something far greater with her now. Not just money, not just security, freedom. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Margot smiled. Not for anyone else's benefit, but for herself. Margot drove slowly back into town, her hands steady on the steering wheel, the binder sitting safely on the passenger seat beside her. For the first time in days, no, for the first time in years, her mind wasn't buzzing with what she had to do for others. There was no running list of meals to cook, gifts to wrap, apologies to craft, or ways to make herself smaller to fit into the shrinking space her family allowed her. There was just a quiet voice inside her, growing louder. What do you want? It was a question she hadn't asked herself in decades. Margot pulled into a small park she used to take Carla and Henry to when they were little. It was nearly empty now, just a few patches of snow turning to slush along the paths. She parked under a bare oak tree, turned off the engine, and sat in the stillness. She opened the binder again and looked through the pages, running her fingertips lightly over the numbers, the legal letters, the possibilities. Walter had left her more than money. He had left her the reminder that she was allowed to dream beyond the role others had confined her to. Margot closed her eyes and pictured it. A life on her own terms. Maybe a little cottage near the coast, where the sea breeze would lift the curtains and fill the rooms with salt and sun. Maybe morning walks to a small bakery, afternoons spent painting again, a hobby she'd abandoned when the children were young. Maybe evenings surrounded by books, music, peace. Not once did the picture include pleading for Sierra's approval, or waiting for Carla to return her calls, or hoping Henry would remember to invite her to family gatherings. Not once did it include begging for a seat at a table where she no longer belonged. Margot let the daydream expand until it didn't feel like a fantasy anymore. It felt like a choice she could make, A tiny flicker of joy, fragile but real, sparked inside her. She wasn't trapped. She wasn't finished. She wasn't useless, as Sierra had so carelessly thrown out. She had simply been pouring all her light into people who had long stopped reaching for its warmth. Now she would turn that light back inward. A memory surfaced. Something Walter used to say when the kids were teenagers, slamming doors and rolling eyes. "Don't water dead plants, Em. Find something that grows with you." She smiled at the thought of him. He would have been furious to see the way she was treated. But more than that, he would have been sad to see how long she stayed trying to fix something that had already withered. Margot pulled out a small notepad from her purse, the same one she used to keep grocery lists and reminders for family birthdays, and flipped to a clean page. At the top, she wrote, "What I want." The words looked strange and bold, sitting alone on the page. She tapped the pen against her chin, thinking, feeling the old patterns of duty and guilt tug at her. She almost wrote, "Keep trying with family." But her hand froze. No, this list wasn't for them. This was for her. Slowly, she started writing. Live by the water. Plant a garden, learn to paint again, take a cooking class just for fun. Host new friends for tea. Laugh without wondering if it's appropriate. Sleep in on Sundays. Say yes to new things without fear. Say no without guilt. Each line she wrote felt like opening a window that had been nailed shut for too long. She didn't know exactly how or when she would make it all happen, but the simple act of claiming it, putting it into ink, made it real. She folded the notepad closed, tucked it into her coat pocket, and looked up at the pale winter sky. The clouds were breaking, shafts of soft light piercing through, promising that nothing, not even the coldest season, lasted forever. Margot started the car again, the engine humming with quiet strength. She wasn't going back to the house. She wasn't going back to the role they had written for her. She was moving forward, and for the first time, she wasn't asking for permission. Margot didn't announce her plans to anyone. No long emotional conversations, no tearful speeches, no final pleadings. She moved quietly, methodically, like a woman laying the bricks of a new foundation under cover of night. The first thing she did was visit her lawyer, an old friend of Walter's named Mr. Halverson, a man with kind eyes and a sharp mind. His office smelled of leather and old books, the walls lined with certificates that testified to decades of careful, loyal work. He greeted her warmly, offering her a chair and a cup of coffee. "Margot Bennett," he said with a smile. "It's been too long. What can I do for you?" Margot placed Walter's binder on his desk and, with steady hands, slid the updated documents toward him. "I need to make some changes," she said calmly. "Big ones." They spent the better part of an hour reviewing her assets. Property, stocks, insurance policies, savings accounts Walter had quietly grown over the years. Mr. Halverson listened without judgment as Margot outlined her wishes. She wanted her will rewritten entirely. Her original plans, leaving equal shares to Carla and Henry with a special fund set aside for Sierra, were erased. In their place, Margot established two new primary beneficiaries, a local scholarship fund for disadvantaged youth and an individual, someone they had never heard of. When Mr. Halverson asked for details, Margot smiled gently. "I met a young woman recently, Ellie Monroe. She's studying nursing, works 2 jobs, always kind, even to strangers." Margot had met Ellie at the hospital the previous year when she had fallen and sprained her wrist. Ellie, a student volunteer, had sat with her for hours, chatting, fetching ice packs, treating her not as a burden, but as a person. It had been a fleeting kindness, but it stayed with Margot. Kindness mattered. Character mattered. Blood ties did not guarantee loyalty or respect. By the end of the meeting, the paperwork was complete. Mr. Halverson shook her hand firmly. "You sure about this, Margot?" "I'm sure," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "I want the love I leave behind to grow somewhere it's wanted." The next few days unfolded with quiet precision. Margot hired a real estate agent to quietly begin appraising her home. She told no one. Not Carla, not Henry. Let them believe she was still mourning the empty seats at her Christmas table. Let them think she was still waiting. She began sorting through her possessions, not in sadness, but in liberation. Clothes she no longer wore, donated. Family heirlooms she once imagined passing down, boxed and labeled for charity auctions. Trinkets and dusty memories, discarded without ceremony. Margot kept only the essentials: a few photo albums, Walter's fishing hat, her mother's locket, a few books that had weathered time alongside her. Each box she packed, each shelf she cleared lightened her. She began spending her afternoons in the town library, researching coastal towns, small communities by the sea where she could build a quieter, richer life. Somewhere new where she could be known not as Mom or Grandma or the one who always hosts, but simply as Margot. She found herself smiling more. Not because someone expected her to, but because the act of reclaiming her future tasted sweet and sharp on her tongue. Meanwhile, back at Carla's house, Margot's absence was noted only in passing. A missed call, a forgotten text. They were too busy with their own lives to notice the tectonic shift quietly taking place beneath their feet. Margot didn't resent them for it anymore. She pitied them a little, clinging to their rushed, shallow lives, unaware that the woman they once leaned on without thanks had stopped waiting for them to notice. The final step was the hardest. One evening, Margot sat by the fireplace, the house dim except for the flicker of flames. She opened a fresh envelope and penned a few final letters. Not explanations, not apologies, just simple notes. I love you. I hope someday you understand. Take care of each other. Find kindness. Hold on to it. She sealed them, placing one by one into a small wooden box Walter had carved for her on their 5th anniversary. The box would stay in the house until it was sold. If they came looking for answers, they would find them. Quiet, dignified, final. Margot stood, stretching her back, feeling the stiffness of age and also the strength of it. Her life was no longer a slow decline into being forgotten. It was a deliberate, graceful departure into something new, and she didn't need anyone's permission to begin. The first cracks appeared sooner than Margot expected. At first they were small, almost invisible, like tiny fractures beneath the surface of a frozen lake. But once they began, they spread faster than anyone could stop them. It started with Christmas leftovers, Carla called one evening, leaving a rushed voicemail. Hey, Mom, we have a ton of food left from Christmas. Thought maybe you'd want some. Call me. Margot listened to the message while sitting in a cozy corner of the town cafe, sipping tea and flipping through brochures for coastal properties. She smiled faintly, set her phone down, and didn't call back. She knew what that call was, not a gesture of love or concern, but guilt, a half-hearted attempt to tether her back to the life she had quietly stepped away from. Next came Henry. A week after New Year's, he texted her. You okay, Mom? Haven't heard from you. Margot read the message carefully. It wasn't a real question. It was the kind of question you ask when you're checking a box. A duty, not a yearning. She put the phone down again without replying. At first, the silence seemed to go unnoticed, but as winter dragged on, the weight of Margot's absence began to settle heavily into the spaces she used to fill. Carla found herself scrambling to organize Sunday dinners, feeling strangely hollow when no one volunteered to host. Henry realized he hadn't seen a homemade pie, a hand-knitted scarf, or a handwritten birthday card in months. Sierra posted flashy pictures of nights out and tropical vacations, but when she came home, the house felt colder, emptier. They had lost something, and they didn't even realize how much until it was gone. Margot, meanwhile, moved through her days with a growing quiet strength. She met with her realtor, finalizing the details to put the house on the market. She toured small seaside towns, imagining her life there. Days spent with her hands in the earth. Evenings filled with music and friends who knew her as she was now, not as she used to be. With every passing week, the shift became more tangible. In the family group chat, where Margot's cheerful messages once kept the rhythm alive, conversations dwindled. Plans became half-hearted. Holidays, once bustling with noise and tradition, now felt like obligations. Margot's absence had pulled a thread from the tightly woven fabric of their family, and now the whole thing sagged under its own weight. Carla called again on a chilly Sunday afternoon, her voice tight when Margot didn't pick up. "Mom, I don't know where you are or what's going on, but we miss you. Call me, okay?" Margot listened to the voicemail while sitting by a lighthouse on the coast, the salty air stinging her cheeks, the sound of waves filling her ears. She thought about calling back. For a long moment she considered it, but then she realized they didn't miss her. They missed the version of her that asked nothing and gave everything. They missed the convenience of her love, not the reality of her soul. And Margot, for the first time, understood her value wasn't something she had to prove. It simply was. She tucked her phone away and watched the sun slip below the horizon, the sky ablaze in hues of gold and crimson. Margot wasn't angry anymore. Anger would have tethered her to them just as tightly as guilt had. She felt something purer, a fierce peace, a certainty that she was no longer tied to a place where she was unseen. At the same time, the balance of power within the family had shifted. Margot was no longer the one holding everyone together. They were left to reckon with their own fractured bonds, their own neglect, their own hollow traditions. And Margot? She wasn't standing still, hoping for them to notice. She was moving forward quietly, steadily, into a life where love wasn't transactional. It was mutual, freely given, freely received. And the farther she walked from the expectations they had chained her to, the lighter she became, the stronger she grew. Spring crept into town quietly, melting the snow, breathing new life into the barren trees. As the days grew longer and warmer, word began to spread through the family. Margot's house was for sale. At first, it didn't cause much alarm. Carla mentioned it offhandedly during a rushed phone call with Henry. "Mom probably just needs a smaller place," Carla said, trying to convince herself as much as her brother. Something easier to manage. But deep down, unease festered. They hadn't seen Margot since Christmas. Not once. No dinner invites, no holiday plans, no casual Sunday brunches. She hadn't been at Easter, hadn't called on birthdays, hadn't dropped by with pies or hand-knitted scarves. They had pushed her into the background so long that when she finally stepped out of the frame, they were left blinking into the empty space where she had been. When Margot's house officially went on the market, they panicked. That's when the invitations started arriving. A text from Carla. "Hey Mom, thinking of a Mother's Day brunch. Hope you can make it." A voicemail from Henry. "Mom, let's do a family cookout soon. Been too long." Even Sierra, who had barely glanced at Margot during Christmas, sent a sheepish DM. "Miss you, G-Ma. Let's get coffee soon." Margot smiled softly at each message. Not cruelly, not bitterly. Just a smile of someone who finally understood her place. She answered none of them. Instead, she waited. She waited until she had finalized everything. The sale of the house, the donation papers for the scholarship fund, the final signatures transferring her assets according to her new will. Then, one sunny afternoon, she agreed to meet them. She chose a small cafe downtown, nothing too grand or sentimental, neutral ground, a place for endings. They arrived before she did, clustered awkwardly around a table by the window. Carla fussed with the sugar packets. Henry stared at his phone. Sierra snapped a selfie, bored. When Margot entered, they looked up with rehearsed smiles and waves, a little too eager, a little too forced. She took a seat across from them, setting her purse down carefully, composed and steady. There were no hugs, no "we missed you" that rang true. Just nervous energy. "Mom," Carla began, forcing a bright tone. "We're so glad you could meet. We've all been worried about you." Margot nodded politely. "I'm fine." Henry leaned in, voice low. "We heard about the house. You should have talked to us first. We could have helped." Margot's eyebrows lifted slightly. Helped with what? There was a pause. The kind of silence where people fumble for words that don't sound selfish. Sierra broke it first. "Well, selling it is a big decision. That house is part of the family." Margot folded her hands neatly in her lap. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "I spent 40 years making that house a home. It's part of my life, not yours." The words hung in the air, heavy and immovable. Carla cleared her throat, trying a different tactic. Of course, but what about the inheritance? You always said you wanted to leave the house to us, for the kids, for family. Margot smiled, a real smile this time, one with steel beneath the kindness. I did say that, once. Sierra leaned forward eagerly. So we're still good, right? Margot looked at each of them in turn, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her point without raising her voice. I've updated my will, she said, her tone clear and unwavering. The house is sold. The proceeds are being donated to a scholarship fund. The remainder of my estate will go to someone who showed me kindness when no one else bothered to. Their faces shifted in stages. Confusion, disbelief, then outrage. You're cutting us out, Carla said, voice cracking. No, Margot said simply. You cut yourselves out. I'm just making it official. Henry pushed back his chair roughly as if the discomfort was too much to bear. Sierra gaped at her grandmother, the entitled shine fading from her eyes. Margot rose, smoothing her coat. I didn't come here to argue, she said quietly. I came to say goodbye properly. She placed a small envelope on the table. 3 identical notes inside, one for each of them. No accusations, no venom, just finality. They sat frozen as she walked out of the cafe and into the bright spring air. No shouting, no tears, just clarity. And as the door swung shut behind her, Margot felt lighter than she had in decades. The days that followed the cafe meeting were strangely quiet. Margot expected anger. She expected accusations, perhaps even attempts to guilt her into changing her mind. But what she got was silence. The stunned kind that follows when people realize the ground has shifted beneath them, and no one is coming to pull them back up. She went on with her plans. Her house sale closed smoothly. The funds transferred into the accounts she had carefully arranged with Mr. Halverson. The scholarship fund, the Walter and Margot Bennett Foundation, was officially launched, offering full tuition grants to hardworking young students who couldn't afford college on their own. It was the kind of legacy Margot was proud to leave behind. Not dusty heirlooms or empty gestures, but opportunity, growth, hope. And then came the final twist. Margot had requested that the official public announcement about the foundation be timed perfectly. Released just days after her move to the coast was complete. She didn't plan to witness the fallout firsthand. She didn't need to. She was already sitting on her new porch, a small, cozy cottage overlooking the endless blue of the Atlantic. When Carla called, Margot let it ring. She could imagine it easily. Carla opening the newspaper over her morning coffee, seeing the full-page announcement with a beaming photo of Margot, not as grandma or mom, but not to those who had dismissed her, mocked her, forgotten her, but to strangers, young dreamers who would carry her legacy forward with gratitude and vigor. The phone buzzed again, a text this time. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. Margot smiled softly and set the phone down without answering. She rocked slowly in her chair, listening to the ocean breathe against the sand, the waves carrying away the last fragments of the woman she had been, the one who waited, the one who hoped in vain. Later that afternoon, another text came from Henry. I can't believe you would do this to us. The words didn't hurt. They rolled off her like water off a stone. She realized then how often guilt had been used like a leash, keeping her tethered, keeping her serving, forgiving, bending. But Margot wasn't carrying that weight anymore. She had laid it down the day she chose herself. The final message came from Sierra. No anger, no outrage, just a single desperate sentence. Why, Grandma, I thought you loved us. Margot stared at the screen for a long time. She thought about Christmas. She thought about the laughter that wasn't meant for her, the careless cruelty, the years of slow erasure. She thought about the difference between loving someone and letting them take your love for granted. Margot typed a reply carefully, without bitterness, without venom. I do love you, Sierra. I always will. But love doesn't mean staying where you're not valued. She hit send and placed the phone face down on the small table beside her. Above her, seagulls wheeled through the cloudless sky, free and untethered. In the distance, a group of children laughed. their kites soaring bright against the blue. Life moved forward, with or without permission. Margot leaned back in her chair, feeling the breeze lift her hair, carrying with it the last whispers of the life she had left behind. She hadn't lost anything. She had set herself free. And in doing so, she had found something far greater than the hollow echoes of obligation and tradition. She had found herself. The weeks drifted by, soft and unhurried. Margot settled into her new life like a ship finding calm waters after a long, violent storm. Her days were slow and full, morning walks along the shoreline, afternoons spent at the town library, evenings by the fire with a book or a painting half finished on an easel by the window. She didn't wait for calls anymore. She didn't check her phone with a knot of hope in her chest. She simply lived, quietly, contentedly. Then, one Saturday morning, a letter arrived. It was handwritten, addressed carefully in neat, familiar script. Carla's. Margot turned it over in her hands for a moment before opening it, not rushing, not bracing. She sat on her porch, the sea wind tangling her hair, and unfolded the letter. "Mom," it began, "I don't know if you'll even read this, but I had to try." The letter was long, apologetic, full of memories Carla recounted, birthdays, graduations, quiet moments when Margot's sacrifices had quietly shaped her life. She admitted they had taken her for granted, that they had assumed she would always be there, that somehow they had convinced themselves her love didn't need tending, didn't need respect to survive. "I don't blame you for doing what you did," Carla wrote. "I see it now. I see all of it. I'm so sorry it took losing you to understand." She ended with a simple plea. "If there's a way to find our way back, I want to try. I want to be better. I want to know you again. Not as the person I expected you to be, but as the person you truly are." Margot sat with the letter resting in her lap, her heart steady. It would have been easy to rush into forgiving, to sweep the years of hurt aside for the sake of old ties. But she didn't feel the old pull anymore. That aching hunger to be needed, to be wanted at any cost. Instead, she felt something new. Clarity. She could love Carla, could hope for her growth without surrendering her own peace. Margot penned a short reply that afternoon. "Carla, I'm glad you wrote. I'm proud of you for seeing what you needed to see. I wish you nothing but love, happiness, and growth. I'm living a good life now. A life that's mine. If we cross paths again, it will be as two whole people, meeting with respect, not expectation. Take care of yourself. Mom." She didn't invite her to visit. She didn't offer to start over immediately. She simply left the door ajar, not wide open, but not bolted shut either. A path could be built between them someday, but only if it was walked with mutual effort, not guilt or obligation. A few days later, another letter arrived. This one from Sierra. Shorter, shakier. "Dear Grandma, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I miss you. I miss what you tried to teach me. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that. Love, Sierra." Margot smiled, touched but not shaken. She wrote back 2 simple lines. "Kindness costs nothing but means everything. I hope you carry that forward." She didn't promise reunions. She didn't offer herself up again on the altar of someone else's growth. She simply affirmed the truth she had fought so hard to claim. Her value was not dependent on being forgiven, loved, or needed by others. It simply existed, whole and unwavering. From then on, the letters trickled in, small glimpses of Carla's efforts to change, occasional updates from Henry, even a card from Sierra after she started volunteering at a local shelter. Margot read each one with an open heart but a steady mind. She answered when she felt like it. She shared pieces of her life without surrendering it. She allowed them to grow at their own pace while she continued walking her own path. And in that balance, Margot found something far richer than the noisy, exhausting love she had once fought so hard to keep. She found respect. She found freedom. She found peace. The sun hung low over the ocean, casting long, golden streaks across the gentle waves. Margot sat quietly on her porch, a cup of tea warming her hands, a soft quilt draped over her legs. The cottage behind her hummed with the small, comforting sounds of a life well lived. A kettle cooling on the stove, a radio playing a faint classical tune, a window cracked open to let the salt air breathe through the rooms. She watched the waves roll in and out, patient and steady, like a heartbeat that belonged not just to the sea, but to the earth itself. It had been nearly a year since she had walked away from the life she thought she was supposed to cling to. A year since she stopped trying to prove her worth to people who had forgotten it. A year since she had quietly rewritten the ending of her story. And in that year, Margot had learned something most people never dared to learn, that you are allowed to choose yourself, even if it means walking away from everything familiar. That love, real love, is not measured in obligation or guilt, but in respect freely given and freely received. Her days now were simple but rich. She had joined a local gardening club, her fingers once again digging into the soil, coaxing life from tiny seeds. She took painting classes every Tuesday afternoon, filling blank canvases with bright colors and bold, sweeping lines. She made friends, true friends, people who liked her not for what she could do for them, but for who she was when she asked for nothing. Every so often, she received a letter from Carla or Sierra, tentative updates, small acts of reaching out. Margot answered when she wanted to, offering encouragement without promises, warmth without surrender. She hoped they grew. She hoped they built better lives, better relationships, better versions of themselves. But she no longer hung her happiness on the hope of their recognition. She had planted new roots, and they were deep and strong. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in flaming oranges and deep purples, Margot rose from her chair and walked slowly down the small path to the beach. The sand was cool beneath her bare feet, the air crisp with the scent of salt and distant rain. She found her favorite spot, a flat rock nestled just far enough from the waves to stay dry, and sat down, pulling her quilt tighter around her shoulders. Above her, a lone gull cried out, soaring into the dying light. Margot closed her eyes and listened. To the sea, to the sky, to the steady, quiet pulse of her own heart. There were no regrets here, no lingering bitterness, no ache for things lost or left behind, only gratitude for the lessons, for the pain that forced her to grow, for the courage it had taken to choose herself without apology. She thought of Walter, his steady hand, his quiet faith in her strength, and she smiled. She could almost hear his voice in the crash of the waves. Find something that grows with you. Margot had found it. In the laughter of new friends, in the riotous colors of her paintings, in the soft, resilient shoots of her garden, in herself. The tide crept closer, the waves reaching out as if to touch her toes, then pulling back, shy and playful. Margot opened her eyes and whispered a small prayer into the twilight, not of longing, not of pleading, but of thanks, for the woman she had been, for the woman she had become, for the life she had built, not out of fear or duty, but out of choice and hope. She stayed there until the first stars blinked awake overhead, their pale light scattered like promises across the velvet sky. Then, with a soft sigh of contentment, she rose and walked slowly back to her cottage, the sand cold and familiar under her feet. Margot didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her story was not behind her anymore. It was ahead, unwritten, unhurried, hers alone to shape. And for the first time in a long, long time, Margot was exactly where she was meant to be.